Hi, I'm Trevor Stevenson, and welcome to Your Story Will Be Different. This is a narrative play podcast where I tell you the stories that come to be from playing a solo tabletop role-playing game. Welcome to Season 2, everyone. And we're starting off with one of the games that is almost ubiquitous with the solo tabletop role-playing game community, 1,000-Year-Old Vampire by Tim Hutchings. It's pretty on the nose what the story's about, but it is a solo journaling tabletop role-playing game where you tell the story of yourself becoming a vampire and the millennia that follows afterwards. As usual, I'll get into the mechanics of the game once the story is done. But with that, let's dive right in. Like many stories, mine is one of love and darkness. You would know the year as 150 AD. From that time, I remember that my name was Tullus. I was a Roman soldier stationed at Hadrian's Wall. Life there was harsh, the wind biting and the cold relentless, but we endured it with the stoicism expected of us. My brother, Varius, was stationed there as well. He was one of the only with whom I could confide my concerns and gripes amongst our fellow centurions. On a characteristically bleak, chilly morning, as the mists shrouded the ground in front of us, Varius and I were on patrol. Not unlike the denizens of this area, the landscape around us was rugged and untamed. As we marched next to the wall, we stomped our feet in rhythm to keep the cold at bay. A blur overhead became a welcome change from the monotony of the day's patrol. A painted, naked Scotsman, his body adorned with blue woad, had hurled himself over the wall with a fierce battle cry. As I recognized what was happening, the world seemed to stand still. The only sound was the blood rushing through my ears. It was probably less than a second, but the embarrassing gap in action stretched on for far too long. It was Varius that drew his sword first, shaking me from my stupor. After that, our training took over, and we attacked with practiced precision. The Scotsman's attacks had a fervor and strength I had never encountered before, but within moments, we had subdued him, his painted body lying still at our feet. As I caught my breath, Varius clapped me on the shoulder, a proud grin on his face.
If you're going to piss yourself, try not to do it so close to me. Remember, little brother, you must always be prepared. You clearly need a refresher on hand-to-hand combat.
We spent the next hour sparring, Varius correcting my stance and movements. He was relentless, only in the way an older brother can be, pushing me to improve, full well knowing that our lives depended on it. It was both frustrating and comforting, his way of showing he cared. Later that day, our commander, Augustus, summoned me. Augustus was widely regarded as a stern but fair leader, his years of service etched into the lines of his face. Somehow he had seen something, some potential in me, and took me under his wing to teach me about command leadership. That afternoon, he sat me down in his tent.
Tullus,
He said,
to lead men, you must understand them, know their strengths, their fears, and how to inspire them. Leadership is more than orders. It is about earning respect and trust.
Through him, I began to learn the intricacies of command. He taught me strategy, the importance of discipline, and the need for compassion in times of war. His lessons were invaluable, the first steps in shaping me into not just a better soldier, but a leader and a better man. Days blended into weeks, and on one of my patrols, I encountered a woman carrying crops to market. Her hair was the most beautiful, rusty red I had ever seen. Her eyes shined the deepest, most impossibly emerald green. made an awkward introduction, and she told me her name was Shaban. In all my years, in all my travels, I had never met someone both soothing and invigorating. After a few more chance encounters and awkward conversations, I learned that Shaban felt that the only way for her people to survive was to find a way to coexist with the Roman soldiers, providing food and assistance. Her skills in the kitchen were unparalleled, and she generously offered to teach me how to cook. As the smell of roasting meat filled the air, she took my arm one evening and said,
"Let me show you how to prepare a meal that will lift the spirits of your centurions."
Under her patient instruction, I learned how to cook hearty stews and bake bread that would sustain us through the harshest days. Shaban taught me that the simple joys and the bonds that could form even in the most unlikely places were the most important things in life. Each day at Hadrian's Wall was a blend of hardship and camaraderie, of battles fought and lessons learned. Through it all, I grew as a soldier and a man, shaped up by the trials and the people around me. My journey was only beginning, or so I thought. Unable to shake the memory of Shaban's kind eyes and soothing presence, I found myself wandering the darkened forest one night in the hope of encountering her again. The moonlight filtered down through the dense canopy, casting unnatural shadows on the ground. I suddenly found myself to be lost, and as I navigated the forest, I stumbled upon a dilapidated green chapel, overgrown with vines and hidden from the main path. It seemed ancient, forgotten by time. I cautiously approached the chapel despite the screaming in my head to turn back. The air grew cold as I stepped inside, colder than even to be expected, and a sense of foreboding washed over me. A form emerged from the shadows, a druid adorned in a mossy cloak, beard speckled with tree bark, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. In a flash, he attacked while calmly chanting incantations that reverberated through the small space. I tried to fight back, to keep the man away from me, but his supernatural abilities were too strong. As my strength failed, his teeth buried into my neck, and I felt a burning sensation spread through my veins. My vision blurred, and I collapsed to the ground. When I awoke, I found myself alone again. Looking at my hands when I got to my feet, I discovered my skin had taken on a sickly green hue, as if plants were growing beneath my flesh. My senses were heightened, and an inhuman, insatiable hunger burned within me now. I stumbled out of the chapel, disoriented and consumed by this new kind of thirst I couldn't fathom. After several hours of shuffling, I encountered my brother in the woods. Relief washed over me at the sight of him. He said that the others in camp had seen me stumble off into the night and had woken him to bring me back. I barely heard his words, however, as I couldn't break my concentration from the warm ambrosia that pumped through his neck. The hunger took over, and I didn't realize that I had attacked him until it was too late. My body, faster than it had ever been, moved without thought. The taste of blood was both repulsive and intoxicating. When I finally regained my senses, Varius lay lifeless at my feet. Horrified by what I had done, I fled into the cool, shadowy arms of the night. I realized that I could never return to the Legion or face anyone I knew. I found refuge in an abandoned farm, its isolation providing the perfect hiding place for things like what I had become. Over time, I began to understand my new nature and the horrifying hunger that came with it. I developed a system to feed without drawing too much attention. I started hunting escaped criminals whose disappearances were less likely to be noticed. Not only did this satisfy my bloodlust, but I also profited from the bounties placed on their heads. As years passed, new laws and tighter security made it increasingly difficult for me to hide among the populace. The authorities grew suspicious of the recurring circumstances, and I narrowly escaped capture several times. It was during one of those close calls that I met Cohen, a salty, surly gravedigger with a penchant for the macabre. He found me hiding among the tombstones one night, weak from lack of feeding.
"Oi, I know that look in your eyes,"
Cohen said.
"I can help you, but you're gonna have to trust me for now."
Desperation left me with no other choice. Cohen provided me with an asset and helped me navigate this newly evolved world. Despite his borderline hideous appearance, he was resourceful and cunning, traits that proved invaluable in my fight for survival. Despite the horror of my condition, I found a strange sense of purpose in my new life. Hunting criminals not only fed my hunger, but also rid the world of those who preyed on the innocent. But the guilt of my brother's death and the loss of my humanity weighed heavily on me despite the justice I felt I was bringing to fruition. In the darkness of the farm, I often thought of Siobhan and learning to cook by her side. Those memories were sparks of warmth in the shadows of my life, and I desperately clung to them. A faint reminder of the man I used to be. Memories that kept me going until they faded like the setting sun. Time is a strange thing for someone like me. Something like me. Days and nights blended into one another, years passing like the blink of an eye. Cohen's family served me faithfully, their knowledge of my existence passed down like a dark family secret. Each new Cohen was prepared from a young age to take the role of my caretaker and confidant, ensuring my survival and secrecy. As decades went by, the world around me changed in ways I never could have imagined. There was a great shift in the way that society moved goods, with trade routes expanding and new methods of transportation emerging. This evolution greatly benefited me, providing new opportunities to hunt and acquire victims without drawing attention. I became adept at using the chaos and movement of goods to my advantage, finding those who wouldn't be missed. However, when the Romans left England, my methods for acquiring victims began to fail. The tightly organized structure of the Roman Empire had proved a steady supply of criminals and outcasts to feed on. With their departure, I found myself in a land without order I had relied on. Forced to adapt, I began feeding on locals, an act that weighed heavily on my shredded conscience. One particularly stormy night, as the clouds roiled in the skies, I was out hunting. The wind howled through the trees, and rain pelted down, turning the ground to mud. I had just finished feeding on an unsuspecting traveler when I felt a presence.
"Tullus."
Shock and disbelief washed over me. My brother's eyes, glinted by moonlight, bore holes into me. "Various," I managed to stammer, my mind racing. It was still in full sprint when he grabbed me by the throat and threw me through a nearby tree.
"I have spent these long years hunting you, planning my vengeance. Do you know what you did to me?"
A mix of guilt and fear washed through me. Various, I didn't know. I didn't know what was happening to me. Various lunged at me, his full strength, fueled by anger and a thirst for revenge. We grappled in the mud, two undead brothers locked in a deadly struggle. His fury was terrifying, but I could feel the same pain that haunted me since that fateful night. Various's attacks were relentless, his rage giving him an edge over me. Or maybe my sympathy was a weakness. I couldn't help that the memory of our childhood, our shared experiences as soldiers, and the bond we once had flashed through my mind. "Various, stop this!" I shouted, trying to reach the man he used to be. Desperation gave me strength, and I managed to push him back, creating a momentary distance between us. This isn't who we are. Who we have to be. We can find a way, together.
There is no other way.
He replied, his voice cold and final.
You're a monster, and you need to be stopped.
After a brief exchange of blows and slashes, I managed to outmaneuver Varius, pinning him to the ground. Please, brother, I begged, let me explain. For a brief moment, I saw a flicker of the old Varius in my eyes. A hint of the brother I loved. But the consuming hatred that had driven him to find me resurfaced.
You can't save me now, Tullus,
he whispered.
And I will never forgive you.
I knew it had to be done. Varius had become what I feared most about myself. Who knows what he would unleash on the world after I was gone? Reluctantly, I grabbed a limb from the nearby tree he had thrown me through and drove it through his heart. As he crumpled to dust, a sense of profound loss and sorrow washed over me. For the first time in years, tears flowed from my eyes, falling to mix with the last fibers of my human life in the mud below me. I stood alone in the storm. I'd lost my brother twice, once to my own hunger, and again to his need for revenge. In the aftermath, with the realization that I was truly alone, my existence was marked by the constant struggle to survive and the heavy burden of my past. Yet I continued to adapt, using the lessons I had learned to navigate the ever-changing world. The legacy of Cohen's family and the systems I had put into place allowed me to endure, even as new challenges arose. Returning to where it all began was not a decision I made lightly. The memories of Shaban, the warmth of her smile, and the comfort of her presence had resonated in my mind. I held out hope that something like what I had experienced in my mortal life was possible for me. I needed closure, and perhaps some semblance of redemption. The town had grown since I had fled. The buildings were taller, the streets now paved and bustling with lively activity. Yet as I walked through the vaguely familiar paths, the echoes of the past whispered to me. I wandered through a haze of nostalgia as I walked through the marketplace. I was convinced my mind was playing tricks on me when I rounded a corner and saw Shaban at the other end of the market. If I still breathed, she would have taken my breath away. This woman was the spitting image of Shaban, her resemblance impossibly familiar. The same kind eyes, the same warm smile. It was as if Shaban had stepped out of my memories and into the present. Summoning all my courage, I approached her. "Excuse me, you look very much like someone I once knew." She looked over my admittedly anachronistic garments.
And who might that be?
A woman named Shaban. Her eyes widened with surprise and a little incredulity.
I doubt you knew her, sir. Shaban was my ancestor. I'm named after her, in fact.
I had found something I thought impossible. This woman was connected to the Shaban that I knew in my time, a living link to my past. Stamping down the rising thirst within me, I began to talk to her. Her name was indeed Shaban, and as the evening wore on, we found ourselves in a cozy tavern, warmed by fire and the glow of shared history. She was enthralled in her own way as she shared family stories. In turn, I told her stories of yore. Fueled by alcohol, the conversation flowed easily. She must have had the same compassion as her namesake, because she was not repulsed by my appearance, despite the sickly green hue of my skin in the flame light. Instead, she seemed intrigued, fascinated by the stories I told her of the ancient times, of the Roman soldiers and the way life used to be in her hometown. For the first time in centuries, I felt a connection to another person and a sense of belonging. As the night deepened, our conversations turned more personal. There was something undeniable and powerful between us. After the fires died down, we found ourselves sharing the night. Darkness inside me stirred and returned just before the dawn. The hunger I had so carefully controlled all night began to rise within me. The scent of her blood, so close, so tantalizing, was more than I could resist. Despite my best efforts, once again, the monster inside me took over. Betraying her trust and my own feelings, I found myself sloppily feeding on her. Gray-green tears rolling down my face as I drank deeply. When I was finally able to control myself again, the horror and regret flooded my being. Siobhan lay lifeless on the bed we had just shared moments before. As both sides of me debated within, I made a choice. I couldn't bear the thought of losing her, not again. As the transformation began, I fled. I ran through the darkened streets, the weight of my actions pressing heavily on my cold, black heart. I condemned her to the same cursed existence that I endured, that Various had endured, but in doing so, I had also saved her life. For days, the image of Siobhan's face, so peaceful in sleep, haunted my dreams. I knew that she would awaken like I did outside the Green Chapel, confused and hungry. Unsure of what was done to her, I had taken her future, her humanity, and replaced it with a never-ending thirst. Yet deep within the darkest corners of me, a spark remained. Siobhan was strong, resilient, and compassionate. Perhaps she would find a way to live with her new nature. Maybe one day she would understand what I had done. And perhaps, one day, I would find the courage to face her again, to explain my actions, and seek her forgiveness. Perhaps out of guilt, perhaps out of a primordial need, I chose to sleep. It was a deep, death-like slumber that lasted for a full century. When I dreamed, it was the faces of those that I had loved. Needless to say, the world had moved on without me. Every mortal I had known or encountered was long dead by the time I stirred. Yet the legacy of Cohen's family continued to endure. Generation after generation, they continued to tend to me, guarding my resting place and ensuring my safety. It was a testament to their unwavering loyalty and the bond forged in the shadows of my cursed existence. I'm sure they were benefiting in their own mortal, materialistic way as well. When I finally awoke, the world was a vastly different place. The once familiar surroundings felt alien, and the weight of time pressed heavily on my mind. Disoriented and consumed by a feral rage I couldn't understand, I lashed out. The barn that Cohen's family had built for me, a sanctuary through the ages, was destroyed in my fury. The walls crumbled, the roof collapsed, and the echoes of my wrath reverberated throughout the night. Without a safe place to hide from the sun, I fled to my ancestral family estate in Gaul. The manor was purported by locals to be cursed and long abandoned. I took in the ruins, realizing that it stood as a haunting reminder of my past life. Every night, I labored tirelessly, repairing the decaying structure brick by brick, tile by tile. It was a Sisyphean task, but it kept my mind occupied, giving me a sense of purpose. As I labored, I discovered I no longer had memories of my childhood in this place. A side effect of my immortality, and perhaps my century sleep. One night, as I meticulously restored the grand hall, an unexpected visitor arrived. The druid, who had cursed me all those years ago, stood before me, both familiar and unsettling. The memory of our first encounter lingered on the edge of the encroaching entropy of my recollections. My initial reaction was one of hostility, my instincts screaming to destroy the one responsible for my torment. But something in his eyes, a hint of shared pain and ancient wisdom, gave me pause. His voice was a calm whisper against the night, and the savage maelstrom in my mind. I did not come to fight. We stood there in silence, the weight of centuries between us. Finally, curiosity won over my anger, and I gestured for him to sit. The druid regaled me with the tales of long ago, of a time before my curse, and the ancient powers that shaped our destinies. The stories were mesmerizing, weaving a tapestry of history, magic, and fate that was captivating and haunting. I asked him if he knew how our kind came to be in this world. He could not answer that. I wander the worlds to find that answer. If I find it, I will let all those that are curious know the riddle's answer. That night, the druid left again. Time passed, though I'm unsure how much. The nights blurred together as I recalled the druid's tales and continued my work on the estate. My unnatural strength made some aspects of rebuilding easier than it would have been when I was human, but some aspects reminded me of my solitude, as help from others would have simplified restoration. It was during one of these seemingly endless nights that I had an overdue encounter with a fellow immortal, Shaban. She found me in the grand hall, and I instantly knew my choice had been the wrong one. Her change was significant. Her presence commanding, terrifying, and her gaze colder than the grave of which I had robbed her. Shaban, I whispered, barely able to believe my eyes. The warmth and compassion I once knew had been replaced by a hardened exterior.
Tullus,
she replied, her voice as sharp as a blade.
I have come to claim a debt.
Her words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. I could see the power radiating from her, the result of years of honing her abilities. But beneath that power was a cold-heartedness that chilled me to my core. A debt? I asked, although I already knew what she spoke of.
The night you made me immortal, you condemned me to this existence of endless pain and hunger.
Her words cut deep, a painful reminder of my actions. I had acted out of a selfish, desperate need to save her, but I put faith in a fool's hope. I did what I thought was right. I couldn't let you die.
Right?
She laughed, a cold, bitter sound.
You think this is a gift?
The fury in her eyes was undeniable, and I realized she had come not just for answers, but for retribution. I'm sorry, I whispered, the words feeling hollow even as I said them.
Sorry won't change what I am, but you can make amends. You can help me find a way to end this curse.
Her demand had taken me by surprise. End it? You mean be human again?
Yes,
she replied, her unholy gaze intense and unwavering.
I've searched for 100 years, but every path has led me to dead ends. You have knowledge, resources.
The thought of ending our tortured existence was both terrifying and liberating. The endless nights, the unrelenting thirst and hunger, the pain of losing everyone we loved, it could all be over. But the fear of the unknown, of what lay after mortality, was just as strong. All right, we'll find a way. Shaban's expression softened ever so slightly. I think she expected more resistance from me. She had come ready for a fight. But just for a moment, I saw a glimpse of the woman I had once known. It was enough to give me hope, to believe that redemption was possible. As we began our quest, the druid's stories took on new meaning, an uncanny parallel to his own journey that could lead us to the end of our curse. Through the nights that followed, the hostility from Shaban ebbed. Like the rebuilt walls of my family estate, we rebuilt trust. Our research through grimoires and archives became a dead end in Gaul, unfortunately. However, Shaban insisted we continue our search throughout the world. I found myself tethered to my family estate for reasons I couldn't understand. Shaban almost returned to her vengeful self when I told her I couldn't leave, but calmed herself.
If I find a cure, I will return for you.
Renewed by the cinders of hope, I found myself beginning to interact with people once more in the ensuing years. The chaos of wars and plagues provided opportunities for someone with my skills and resilience. Impossibly, I found myself in charge of a makeshift hospital, a place where the wounded and sick sought refuge and healing. My memories of the past were fading, the faces and names blurring into indistinct shapes, but the life lessons from my brother, whose name I could no longer recall, still guided my hands as I stitched wounds and treated illnesses. The hospital was a grim place, filled with the groans of the injured and the desperate cries of those in pain. No one noticed if one of the terminal patients disappeared. Yet I found it was a place of hope, where lives could be saved and suffering alleviated. I moved through the rows of makeshift beds, my touch steady and sure, my mind focused on the present and the tasks at hand. The knowledge and skills I had acquired over the centuries were put to use in the service of others, a small redemption for the many monstrous deeds of my past. Despite my best efforts and the demands of the hospital, I inevitably found myself becoming introspective. The endless nights offered ample time for reflection. My thoughts often turned inward. This introspection began to manifest in creative acts. I started to carve intricate designs into the handles of my surgical tools, the repetitive motions soothing my troubled mind. I also began to write, my journal filled with the musings on the nature of life, death, and the strange existence I led. One night, as I gazed out of a small window at the night sky, I was struck by the beauty of the stars. Their distant light, cold and unchanging, seemed oddly fitting for a creature of the night like myself. I was startled by a young man who had caught me in my admiration. We briefly spoke of our adoration of the heavens, and he suggested a few books on the subject for me. With that, I decided to learn more about astronomy, finding solace in the study of the heavens. The movement of the stars, the phases of the moon, and the vast expanse of the cosmos became a source of fascination for me. I pushed myself to study astronomy and astrology with an intensity that bordered on obsession. The pages of my journal were filled with sketches of constellations, detailed notes on celestial phenomena, and reflections on the mysteries of the universe. The nights passed quickly as I immersed myself in my studies, often losing track of time until the first light of dawn threatened to reveal my true nature. The more I learned, the more I felt a deep connection to the cosmos. The stars, with their eternal presence, seemed to offer a sense of permanence and continuity that I lacked in comparison. They were a constant in a world of change, a reminder that some things remained the same even as everything else shifted and evolved. One particularly clear night, I found myself on the roof of the hospital, a crude telescope in hand. I traced the path of a comet across the sky, its glowing tail a beacon in the darkness, and I remained there, transfixed as the hours slipped by. It was only the faint light of dawn creeping over the horizon that jolted me back to reality. As my flesh began to crawl and sizzle, I hurried inside. The danger of exposure was a stark reminder of my limitations. Yet despite these infrequent risks to my immortal body, I continued to study the stars. They offered a refuge from the infrequent horrors of the hospital and the memories that reared their heads to haunt me from time to time before fading into obscurity. One night I awoke in the darkest room of the estate, and I was not alone. The Cohen clan had found me. For generations, they had guarded my secrets, tended to my needs, and protected me from the outside world. During this time, I had come to see them not just as guardians, but as a kind of family, a fragile, temporary connection that lent my existence a semblance of normalcy. However, as with all things, this too was destined to change. It was the latest generation of Cohen's descendants who ultimately turned on me. They were different from their ancestors, hardened by the harshness of the modern world, skeptical and untrusting. Where their forebears had seen me as a benefactor to be respected and protected, they only saw a monster, a relic of the past that needed to be destroyed, just as I had callously done to their ancestral farm on a dark whim all those decades before. It began with whispers and suspicions. They had found my journals, the detailed account of my long existence, the secrets I had kept hidden for centuries. They read about the lives that I had taken, the people I had fed upon, and the monstrous deeds I had committed in the shadows. The stories horrified them, and their fear turned to hatred. I noticed the change in their behavior, how they avoided my gaze, how their conversations grew hushed when I entered the room. The once warm and welcoming atmosphere turned cold and tense. My attempts to bridge the gap were met with silence and curt replies. The bond that had sustained us for so long was fraying, and I could sense the impending rupture. One fateful night, as I was engrossed in my astronomical studies, they came for me. The moonlight filtered through the windows, not unsimilar to that outside the Green Chapel all those centuries ago, casting an eerie glow on the scene as the Cohens stormed into the room, armed with stakes and torches. The look in their eye was one of pure resolve, and I knew that there'd be no reasoning with them. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady through fear and sorrow gripping my heart. "You are a monster," the eldest of the clan replied, his voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. "We've always known what you are. We've read your journals. We know what you have done. Our family is cursed for our loyalty to you. We must purge ourselves of your darkness if we are to prosper once again. You must be destroyed." Desperation clawed at me as I tried to appeal to their sense of history, to the bond that had linked our fates for so long. "Your family protected me for centuries. I have not harmed you. I've sought only to exist, to find some measure of peace." "It ends tonight," the elder said, raising his stake. I fought back, my vampiric strength and speed giving me an edge, but their numbers and determination overwhelmed me. The struggle was fierce, and the room was soon filled with the sounds of battle. Shouts, the crash of furniture, the crackle of flames. They were relentless, driven by a hatred I could not quell. A few fell to my attacks, but with each life I took, my guilt grew more heavy and slowed my limbs. One by one, they overpowered me, driving me back until I was cornered. The final blow came with a searing pain at the stake that was driven through my heart. My vision blurred, and I fell to the ground, the world fading around me. In my last moments, I saw their faces, twisted with a mixture of triumph and sorrow. They had succeeded in their mission to kill me, but would it be the boon that they had fought for? Each second of my agony lasted for a lifetime, an appropriate sentence for my last moments. As my life ebbed away, memories flooded my mind, of the brother whose name I could no longer remember, of Shaban and the night I had condemned her to immortality, of the centuries of wandering and the fleeting moments of connection. Even the stars now seemed distant and cold, indifferent to my fate. In those final moments, I wondered if there was any redemption for a creature like me. Had my existence been nothing but a prolonged curse, a punishment for deeds long past? Or was there a greater meaning, some lesson to be learned from the long and tortured path I had walked? I thought of Shaban and the Druid. Maybe their quests would have greater meaning to humanity and our kind than my selfish existence had been. The pain grew unbearable. The darkness closed in. My thoughts drifted to Cohen's family, the betrayal that had brought me to this end. They had seen me as a monster, and I knew they were right. But I had also been a guardian, a healer, a seeker of knowledge. My existence had been a complex tapestry of light and dark, of moments of humanity intertwined with acts of monstrosity. As the darkness consumed me, I felt a strange sensation, one I hadn't known in eons. Peace. The struggle was over, the burden lifted. My long, weary journey had come to an end, and whatever awaited me beyond this life, if anything, I faced with the hope that in some small way my existence had mattered. The last thing I saw before the darkness took me completely was the face of the eldest Cohen, a tear running down his cheek. Perhaps in the end he understood the weight of what they had done. Perhaps in that moment he saw not just a monster, but the man who had once been, and the complexities of a life lived in the shadows. With a final, shuddering breath, I closed my eyes and let go. The pain faded, the world dissolved, and I was free. Thousand-Year-Old Vampire is a fantastic journaling solo tabletop role-playing game. I found myself enthralled by the prospect of humanizing the inhuman, essentially. Seeing a journal from a creature of the night who has the opportunity to reflect on what it means to be human and what it means to be inhuman. I picked up a physical copy of the game, which is in the form of a hardback journal, and it adds a lot to it. I got to say, when you go through and you play the game for yourself, pick up a physical copy of it. I also know that Tim Hutchings is also putting out a sequel to it soon. So I would say now's the opportunity to jump in, learn what life is like for your 1,000-year-old vampire, and see what situations you get put into. The gameplay of it, by the way, is a series of dozens and dozens of prompts that you use dice to roll back and forwards to. And as you go through, you're collecting resources, essentially, that will help you resolve conflicts in certain situations further along into the story. And once you get to a point where you can no longer use resources, that's when your vampire will die. There's multiple endings for how the world could be. Some of them are very hard sci-fi or I guess horror. And I was a little disappointed that I didn't get some of those, but I have a feeling that I may go through and play it again at some point. It feels like something you should be playing in like the deepest corner of a library somewhere. I feel like being surrounded by ageless old books is definitely going to add to kind of the mise en scène, I guess, to be a pretentious film student, for the experience. And I'm really excited to see what your vampire is like. For our next session, we're going to be playing Ironsworn, which is an Emmy award-winning tabletop role-playing game where you undertake perilous quests in the dark fantasy setting of the Ironlands. Thank you again for listening to Your Story Will Be Different. It's exciting to be in season 2, but if you want to help share the wealth with everyone, it's the same old, right? Write a review on Apple Podcasts or your platform of choice. Leave a rating. Tell someone about it. Any of these things will help spread the love of the podcast. And of course, as always, I am going to leave a link in the show notes to 1,000-Year-Old Vampire by Tim Hutchings. Check it out for yourself. It is a long, fun solo tabletop RPG that I think you're going to have a blast with. But just remember, your story will be different.